Welcome everyone to our session, Architecture Modernization, Aligning Software Strategy and Structure. And we're excited to be joined by Nick Chun. Nick has worked in IT for over 15 years with roles ranging from developer, principal engineer, platform lead, and consultant. He is the author of multiple books, including Architecture Modernization. So, really looking forward to learning from you, Nick, in this session. So, now I would like to hand over to you.
Cool. Well, firstly, just like to say thank you for having the chance to be part of this event. It's a great lineup you have. I will try to offer some useful insights on the topic of architecture modernization. Obviously, it's a very big topic. I can't cover every aspect of modernization in this talk, so try to put together some of the main different topics, different areas, maybe some of the ideas and concepts that are less common, not to repeat the common things that you might see a lot in other places. Modernization requires a lot of different skills, definitely. I'm currently working at a French company called Payfit. I've been here for like 8 months, I think, really enjoying it. And I'm very hands-on, very involved with the teams. And every day is a different day, different challenges, different problems to solve, different kinds of problems to solve, different skills. So I can't include all of my insights in this talk. I do try to post a lot on LinkedIn and Blue Sky and Mastodon. I try and share my thoughts, things that I'm learning, things that aren't in my talk or my blog, etc. I try and keep like a regular posting cadence. Sometimes my colleagues at work, they think, are you posting things on LinkedIn about me, about something I did at work? So if any of my colleagues are watching, don't worry. None of my LinkedIn posts are about you. I'm just trying to continuously share things about modernization that I'm learning that aren't covered in my books or covered on my blog or anything. So let's get started. And I think the first question the first question we all have to ask ourselves is, why would you modernize? Why would you stop building new features and do modernization work instead? If you're a successful company, why? What's the point of slowing down, of stopping improving your product? And I think there can be many valid reasons. Many valid reasons not to modernize. If you're an existing company, if you're a successful company, you have market share, you have people using your products, and people can become very loyal, or maybe not loyal, but we get stuck in habits. We have our favorite products and we use them, and to move to another product, it's going to take something different to change our minds. Even if some other company builds a better product, if you're used to one product and one company and you've got all your data in there, it's a big change to move to a different product. So if you're an existing company with a product that's not the best, but you have a lot of customers, you're a market leader, you might not need to modernize. You might, having a better product, being able to do things that modernization enables, might not change anything. An existing company has existing revenue streams, big budget, so you can hire the best people. And moving to maybe a smaller company that's building a new product, they can't give you as much salary. Maybe you have to try and find some other incentives to make it worthwhile. So existing companies do have a lot of advantages, and it might not be worth modernizing, let's be honest. And even if it is worth modernizing, you have to convince the people in your company that all of these reasons on this slide are actually not enough, and you do need to modernize. So obviously, if you're more on the tech side, you'll be well aware of the reasons why we need to modernize. And that's because being a successful company also means you have risks. You build up lots of legacy, which gets harder and harder to change. As your software gets harder to change, as you have bugs in production, as you need to build a reliable product to support your customers, companies introduce more bureaucracy and processes and red tape. So it's not just the tech that's slowing us down, it's all the processes around it. We can be stuck on old technologies that are harder to work with. And some companies are complacent. they just think they've always been successful, and there's no there's no need to modernize. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. They might not realize that there are other companies that are building better products, or they might obviously see these companies and think, yeah, this startup, they think they're cool, but they'll never reach our scale. They'll never take our customers away. And that might be correct, but it might not be. So got to think about all these factors. One of the stories I like, here's a picture of my friend Orlando. He drinks a lot of coffee, as you can see. He worked at OpenTable I think this goes back to around 2011, 2012. I'm not very good with years. I always get things mixed up. But yeah, back around that period, OpenTable had this monolith. It had 100 plus engineers working in it. As probably many of you are aware, when you're in that kind of situation, you're deploying not very often, once a month. Can be even more in some companies, once every 2 months or 3 months. On UK government projects, they used to deploy like once a year, I heard, on some projects. So yeah, one of those kind of situations, you get a lot of merge conflicts. You get a lot of changes in one team affecting others because of all the coupling in this big legacy monolith. But what was interesting about OpenTable is they actually recognized in advance, we are the current market leader, but the trajectory we're on, I'm not good with words either, not good with years, not good with words, not good with a lot of things. But OpenTable, they were on this trajectory that they recognized we can see our competitors are actually moving at speed faster than us. And if we don't do something now, it's going to be too late and we're going to fall behind them. So that's quite a good example. One of the questions I often encourage people or ask people is, if you do nothing, if you just keep working as you are now, if you don't modernize anything, how long will it be until your competitors catch up with you? And you get a whole range of responses to that question, and it can give a lot of insights into how the company feels about their current state, about potential for modernizing. But OpenTable was a success story. They did modernize. They got to a point where every team was deploying multiple times per day. And I think on the business side and the tech side, they were all very happy about that. So one of the key points is to be aware of all these factors and to understand, can we get away with not modernizing, or are we on a trajectory where we have to modernize or we're going to have some troubles? One of the other really fundamental points about modernizing is that it's almost inevitable in most situations. Even if you make a lot of good decisions, even if you make perfect decisions every day, you might still be in a position where you need to modernize at some point. There are a number of factors here, but one of the most important ones is that when you make a decision, your decision is based on what you know at the time, based on your company's current strategy. You might design a system which is perfect for the requirements you have, and then over time, as the business grows and does other things, you realize, oh, we're building features on top of a platform, on top of a system that wasn't designed for these kind of features. So we can still end up in a situation where we need to modernize. And as Ornella explains here, Vinted, they found themselves in a situation like this. So if you see the top point here, it's noticing that sign. That's a really important sign. Is it, when you're implementing a new feature in your system, does it feel more complex than it should be, or more complex than it was before? If you're getting to that point, even if you have very clean code, it might be that your domain model, the abstractions you've built into your system, are no longer totally relevant. And that's the example here with Vinted. I didn't work at Vinted. I don't have all the details. I spoke to Ornella a lot, so I know quite a bit. And as she explained to me, they built a system which was based around women's clothing. That was how they started as a company. And then they grew into other verticals that weren't about women's clothing. And they were still trying to add those features on top of a system that was designed for women's clothing. So I'm sure you've got a lot of experiences. Maybe if you're a developer and you look at the code base you're working in now and you realize, oh yeah, I'm building a feature related to X or Y, but the system was more designed for A or B. Right? Another example is when companies expand into multiple countries. Or when I worked at Salesforce in the marketing cloud, they built a system for running advertising campaigns on Twitter. It was called Twitter at the time. And they wanted to then do campaigns on Facebook and LinkedIn and other social networks. And the existing code base was completely designed for one social network, and it got stretched to work on others, but not necessarily the way you would do it if you started from a blank canvas and designed it to support all these different use cases. So I think, to summarize the main reason for modernizing, I think what most companies are looking for is they've got some kind of disadvantage. They've got some problems that are having a negative business impact, and modernization is addressing those problems to get a competitive advantage on a business level. And I think one of the ways I think about this is you want to be a successful company, an established company with market share and brand reputation, but you also want to be able to innovate like a smaller, a younger company. I think that's what we're trying to get to, trying to get the best of those both worlds. And I think I heard, I'm not sure who said this, but I think it might have even been me. I'm not sure who. I'm not good at anything, like I told you. But someone said modernization is about enabling things that aren't currently possible or are too expensive. So I think that's the key takeaways there. So in this talk, I'm going to cover 3 different topics. First one is around the principles of modernizing, thinking about what is it your modernized architecture should be based on, the kind of ideas that you should be thinking about when you design that new system. Second part is some interesting tools I've been using a lot and I find are quite relevant for modernization. And the third part is more around the organizational aspect. How do you work as groups, as communities, as organizational structures to modernize effectively, to get started and to continue modernizing? So the first topic, architecting for flow, I think this is really what companies are looking for from modernization. They're in a situation where they're going slowly, and that inability to move quickly is a problem. It could also be that certain things just aren't possible with the current system. And so a new design will allow new types of feature to be built that are currently not possible. So it's about new possibilities and generally going faster, more reliably with fewer bugs. So if we rewrite our system in a new tech, will that fix all of our problems? Probably not. Let's be honest though, if you are using a modern tech, it certainly has a lot of advantages. Would you rather use a programming language from today or 20 years ago? Obviously, using something from today is going to be more productive, more of an ecosystem around it, more reliable, etc. But only replacing the tech won't fix all your problems. It won't help you to achieve the maximum possible from modernization. And it might have a very limited benefit depending on the kind of changes in your system, because just changing your technology won't fix the coupling, and it won't fix other issues like we talked about with Ornella's example, where your system is based on the wrong abstractions, or maybe abstractions that were good before, but they're no longer optimal, let's say. So I like to think about architecture as being composed of value streams. And I think a good value stream is independent. And an independent value stream has 4 real pieces. There are 4 different perspectives to keep in mind when you're modernizing. I think the first one is about being domain aligned. As we just talked about with the Ornella example, you really want to design your system based on abstractions that represent how your business really works. If you're trying to build a platform that supports multiple countries or multiple types of social network, you want to think about your domain concepts and how you can model that in a way that is optimized for all your use cases. And equally, when you collaborate with more business-minded people, are you talking the same language, using the same concepts? That's like the domain-driven design aspect, you could say. I think being outcome-oriented is also very important. We need to be able to identify what are the key metrics, what are the key North Stars that each part of the system is contributing to. That's important so we can invest the right amount of time and effort. As we're modernizing, we might have a system that we could spend 10 years modernizing. So by having very clear outcomes each part of the system, we know the value it can provide, how much modernization is worth it. And having clear outcomes also supports teams being empowered. If teams are having to wait for decisions to be made outside the team, then even if you have a well-designed system, the team will still be blocked. The flow will still be blocked. So it's important to think about the organizational side of things too. If you're aware of Conway's law, obviously talking a lot about that here. And then finally, we have the technical side of things. We want the software and the infrastructure to be designed in a way that the teams can implement changes and deliver them to production very quickly. Multiple times per day is, I think, what most companies are looking for now. And I think if you do all of these four things well, you'll be in a great position. But if you only focus on one or two of these and you miss the others, I think you probably won't get the full benefits of modernization. I've got an example here from a company called ICE. They do music royalty calculation. My friend Casper, he is currently working there. And I like this story because Casper's someone who understands all these concepts around DDD and team topologies, and he applied them very successfully at ICE. And he was generous enough to share his story and let me use it in this talk. So if you look at the top, it represents what a situation a lot of companies might find themselves in, where you've got an architecture that's maybe grown organically. And it was lacking a bit of that domain perspective because there are some words here like import, export system that don't really speak in the domain language. The systems are very technical. You can see that the teams are having to work in different systems. So the cognitive load is very high for those teams. They can't think about one part in isolation, and there's overlap with other teams, and they're not able to deploy very often. So when Casper modernized and applied concepts like DDD, team topologies, DevOps, he thought about all those different perspectives, not on his own, of course, with his colleagues and other people who were also involved, but they achieved what I was talking about previously with these independent value streams. So you can see at the bottom, we have clearly named subdomains from a business perspective, usage ingestion, royalty calculation, claims, etc. We didn't really notice these before. We can see that the cognitive load of each team is much lower because we have these clear domain boundaries and we have the software aligned to the domain boundaries. The teams the lower coupling means teams can have a reduced scope and be more focused in the areas they work on. And if you look on the right-hand side, they had some very clear metrics, and these metrics were important to modernize because it showed actually this was actually worth it. Investing in modernization was worth it here. On a technical level, they were deployed more frequently. But what's really interesting here is the business metrics. They reduced their ingestion processing time by 80%, and their matching process was 5x. They had 5x more productivity there. So very clear business metrics, the exact kind of outcomes we're looking for. And so I would say if you are starting to modernize or thinking of modernizing, could you imagine a situation like this in what you're working on? The clear domain boundaries, teams with a clear scope, and the clear business outcomes that you know will be optimized based on modernization. Another interesting aspect of the architecture is what you don't build and being very clear about what's out of scope, because your system, if you could have a system that would take 10 years to modernize, how much of that is actually worth modernizing? Eight of those years could be totally pointless and wasteful. So, and the bigger the company, the bigger the legacy you've got, the more chance you have of wasting time modernizing things that isn't worth it. And so this concept of feature parity is something that we need to address very early. It's a very tempting proposition. We're going to rebuild the new system and it will do all of the same things as the old system. So this study from Pendo is worth thinking about. It's always 80% something and 20% something. So I'm not sure how reliable these numbers are, but I think you can use this to reflect on your current experiences. So what Pendo are saying is 80% of the features in the average product is rarely or never used. So if you're modernizing a system, potentially 80% of that system doesn't need modernizing or doesn't need much modernization. So how are you going to find out the 20% that really does need modernizing? And so if you just do feature parity and you just make the new system do all the things the old one did, 80% of that could be completely unnecessary. And the longer modernization takes, the more chance it has of being cancelled halfway through, and you get stuck in this state where you've got half modernized bits, half legacy bits. And if you get stuck halfway through, that can actually be more complex than not even modernizing altogether. So if you can really focus on what needs to be modernized and not modernize things that don't need it, you actually have more chance of finishing your modernization. So what I like to think about are the different layers here. What are the different layers? Not on a technical level, but on a conceptual level. What things could we modernize? At what layers of this stack, modernization stack, could we modernize? So we have the software in the middle, obviously, the technology choices, and the infrastructure, maybe moving to something where we have to manage less ourselves and we can rely on providers to manage more things for us. We can also improve the user interface and the user experience. If we're going through all of this effort to modernize a system, improving the UX can often bring a lot of value as well. What you often find is the UX has been difficult because the legacy was hard to change. UX got stuck and they never had a chance to improve it. And this might be that chance to fix all those issues in the UX that have not been possible before. Then we get to the domain aspect. So again, going back to Ornella's example, let's really think about the abstractions in our system. What abstractions will make the most sense for how the business wants to grow in the future? Are we targeting multiple countries? Are we expanding into new verticals? Let's really think about a domain model that will be optimized for these new use cases we have and we will have to support in the future. Obviously, the risk there is we can't predict the future. We don't want to build a generic system up front that can support all possible future use cases. That actually does happen. Please, I recommend not doing that because I haven't seen it working out yet. And it's also a chance to, when you think about the domain model, it's a chance to actually improve collaboration in your company. Very often, the legacy system will use words and phrases that the business people don't use anymore, or maybe they never used. And so by building this shared domain model together before you modernize, and as you modernize, you can actually make it easier to collaborate with your business experts and domain experts because the language will be the same. And obviously, you can actually change the domain itself. You can actually really think about all these different business rules. And again, when we talk about feature parity, this is a chance to say, we don't need this feature. We can simplify this feature. We have this very complex manual business process. Let's actually simplify the process. Let's automate the process. So those are the different layers. I've got another example here. This is a project I worked on. I do work on some projects. I don't just steal other people's stories. This one was quite an old one, 2016, I think. I was working for the UK government, working on some business taxes, modernizing a certain kind of taxes. And we were doing the really full stack here. So we had UX researchers. They were going out every week doing user research, bringing insights back to the team. We were using a whole new tech stack. In this example, we were using Scala, and we were using a platform that had been built in the company with a you build it, you run it approach. And so a lot of cognitive load was taken away from the teams and owned by the platform. So teams were more business focused, able to deploy every day. Domain model was certainly something we looked a lot at, trying to clarify. So the reason for that is also connected to the bottom point about changing the actual domain itself. So the reason for this project was a lot of the government laws in this area weren't really designed when technology was available, things like the internet and mobile apps. And the government was like, how can we really optimize all these processes for a modern world? How can we benefit from how the world's changed? And in the actual domain itself, I think there were business rules. I'm pretty sure someone told me some of the business rules had existed for more than 100 years, certainly many decades, maybe even 100 years. And so when we think about modernization, we were modernizing the government, and we actually had to change the law to actually modernize this system. So you probably won't be modernizing the law in your country for every system you build, maybe not even half of them. And you don't want to take this mindset across your whole system. Otherwise, you're over modernized, certainly. But it's always worth thinking about for each part of your system, at each of these different layers, what is the right modernization investment to make? So to answer that question, I will share, and answer other questions as well, I will share some tools which I think are very valuable, and have been very useful to me in the last years. So the first one, you might find it surprising, you might not. I found it surprising when I started to really do modernizations as a consultant. I was working with more companies. As every modernization project I worked on, I realized more and more that at the start there's a lot of assumptions that happen in modernization. And as you're going through modernization, you often start to unwind these assumptions and think, okay, we're not on the right path here because what we thought needed to be modernized didn't need to be modernized. Problems we thought existed don't actually exist, that kind of thing. And also another problem with modernization is sometimes it's a very technical thing. We're moving to the cloud, we're building some new platform. And so people think it's a technical project when it's not. It shouldn't be a technical project, as we talked about earlier. So I find that listening tours can be very useful because you don't have any assumptions, and all you do is just go around your company and try and talk to as many different people as possible, depending on how much time you have available. People who work in finance, who work in customer support, people who work in different domains in your company, different job titles, just trying to understand what problems do you have at the moment. What would be your ideal scenario? If you could fix any one problem, what would that be? Asking those kind of questions. And so the benefit of this is you understand what people really think and care about, and you don't just make these assumptions or trust other people's assumptions. And it's also a great way to build relationships, because at some point you're going to have to talk to these people and you're going to have to ask them, can we not build that new feature and can we modernize instead? And if you spent some time talking to those people and listening to their problems before you propose solutions, they're much more likely to say, I trust you. I feel like you've understood me and listened to me. So yeah, I'm going to give you the benefit here that if you say modernizing is beneficial, I'm going to trust you. But it's not easy to do these listening tours. For me, I was a very technical person, so I actually hate speaking to people. I hate small talk. I hate saying, how was your day? How are you? Blah, blah, blah. Really not my thing. But when you do these modernizations, that's not an option. You have to talk to people. You have to learn how to do this. I learned a lot of things the hard way and a lot of things with help from people I worked with. And asking good questions is certainly one of those things I highly, highly, highly recommend. So here we have a question. Is this a good question? I'm not surprised you're so unproductive with the in-house CRM and all those spreadsheets. We will automate your process and switch to Salesforce. This will be great, right? Anything else we can do to help you? So firstly, you've told them they're unproductive. Secondly, you've said the tool they use and all these spreadsheets they've built to manage the system that they're forced to deal with. You've kind of insulted their baby. You've then given them a solution to their problem and you've told them it's a great, and then you've implied that you've helped them here and is there anything else you can do to help them? So there's a lot of things wrong about this question, and I think one simple advice I would say is to just try and have like open-ended questions or questions where you don't propose solutions as much as possible. And I think you'll be very surprised at how the conversations can be different if you haven't done that before. It was very interesting to me. And then let's move on to the second tool. So the point here is, as we talked about earlier, if you don't have those clear business metrics, if you don't have those clear business North Stars, it's very hard to modernize. Because when you modernize, you have to make difficult decisions about where to invest, what to stop working on, what new features to build, what things to put on hold, and what abstractions to build in your system. And if you don't have those clear North Stars, you have to guess about what you think is the right trade-offs to make. So we talked about earlier, this is about understanding how your company wants to grow. Basically, are you staying in your current country and expanding your market in this one country? Are you moving into other countries, other continents? Are you building new products or focusing on the current products? Having the North Stars connected to these business growth things makes it much easier to make the right architecture choices. And yeah, as I mentioned before, I have worked with companies where this wasn't clear, and they've tried to build these very flexible systems to support all possible use cases, so that when the business does make their mind up, they'll be ready. And I really haven't seen that working. You get a lot of complexity, more complexity than's needed, and the system's actually harder to change. So I find impact mapping is very useful when you're having your listening tours, when you're talking to stakeholders. You can identify what's important to them on a strategic level. So here we have 20 million in revenue, and what are the business impacts needed to achieve that? So as we saw with Casper's example, things like accuracy rates, efficiency, productivity, reducing the lead times for internal processes, attracting new clients. And then you can connect those to modernization deliverables, like automating certain workflows or improve the UX of a legacy tool, for example. So impact mapping helps you to connect things from a business level to your modernization level with quite a clear link. The next tool is similar. It solves a similar problem, but not quite. So if you haven't heard of Wardley mapping, it's basically this concept where you build value chains, not value streams, value chains. So a value chain is composed of these three basic components. You have your users. So here we have a customer and a restaurant. We're a food delivery company. And then we think about what are the user needs. They want to enjoy some food, or they want to grow their business by attracting new customers. And then the interesting part for us maybe is where we start to map out these components in our architecture, in our current architecture, or maybe our future architecture. And so if we want to satisfy the user need of enjoying great food without cooking, they need a mobile app to build, to purchase. They need a menu service, which actually provides the mobile app with the menus. The mobile app needs to be able to talk to an ordering service. All these things have to run on a cloud platform. Not that interesting so far. The next bit is where things get interesting. So what you can do is you can then put your value chains on your Wardley map, and you move each of your architecture components into one of these four phases: Genesis, custom, product, or commodity. And components move from left to right in Genesis. So Genesis would be big, new, unproven ideas. And commodity would be old, boring things that your company can't really improve anymore. If you invest in these things, it won't give you an advantage in the market. And so from a modernization perspective, by mapping your components out in these phases, you can then start to understand when we modernize certain parts of the system, we want to have that fast flow because we want to be able to innovate faster. For some parts of the system, which are more product or commodity, we want to really keep what's there now with maybe some small ongoing changes, but we want to reduce that cost so that we can invest in things that are more on the left-hand side. So that might be, simplifying processes. It might be turning off features. It might be modernizing them so that they're creating less bugs in production to reduce the amount of support or customer support tickets. It could be moving to off-the-shelf tools, which are just a less load to run and maintain. So with your Wardley map, which is very much from a business perspective, you can then start to make these decisions about where to invest and how much to invest and what kind of investment based on these business factors. And obviously you would try and create the Wardley map with a group of different people from different perspectives and come to this shared view. But the important thing with a Wardley map is you don't make your modernization choices based on the current state. You have to think about the arrows on your Wardley map. And so what you want to imagine is if we have this menu service and it's in the custom phase, Custom means it's still quite a new concept. It's still something that we can innovate and get an advantage in the market. We can have new features, better features. But at some point, your competitors will catch up with you. They might build their own menu service, which is as good as yours or better than yours. And you really want to understand, at what point will that happen? At what point will the industry converge on this particular component? If it's in 6 months' time, then you don't really want to have this super fast evolution there, because it's going to become a commodity very soon. However, if your business experts say to you, we think that this menu component is something that we can keep evolving and we can stay ahead of our competitors for 5 years, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, then you would think, okay, modernization on a deeper level makes much more sense here. We really want to be able to innovate quickly, not just for 6 months, but for the next 3 or 4 years. Modernization makes a lot of sense here. So a couple more tools to share with you. Number 4, one of my favorite, it's a technique called event storming. There are different flavors of event storming which can come in useful in different scenarios. The first one is big picture. With big picture event storming, you map out large parts of your business or in like particular processes that could span multiple teams. And generally you want to map out the current state and identify how does your business work. And so when you do event storming, you would have a mix of people all together in one room, and you would build this collective view of how the business works. And then you can start to talk about what's working in the current system, what are the areas that we feel that need modernizing and what don't, which features can be deleted. As we talked about earlier with the Pendo example, if 80% of the features aren't being used or are rarely being used, these event storming workshops are a chance to identify those unused features. It can also identify knowledge gaps. A very big problem with your legacy systems is nobody knows how half of this stuff works anymore. They all left 10 years ago. And with event storming, it can highlight where there are knowledge gaps and help you to identify places where you want to go back into your legacy and do more discovery. Process modeling event storming is a bit more detailed, usually more towards the future state where you want to design how your business should work in the future. So with big picture, you might identify some manual process that's very expensive, has lots of errors, and you would like to, as you're modernizing, you would like to modernize the domain itself, improve that process, design a new domain model, improve the UX. With process modeling, you can it's suited for that purpose. And with event storming, it's also a great way to actually start identifying your business subdomains, to start having that domain perspective. So once you've mapped out a big picture event storm, you can then chop it up into these different subdomains. Here's a very boring example of e-commerce, search and browse, cart and checkout, ordering, etc. Just for an example. In real workshops, it gets much more interesting than this. But you can have these conversations with your business experts, with all the people who are involved in this part of the system you're modernizing, and you can start to identify those business outcomes, those domain boundaries based on different people's perspective. It's not just the developers who are designing this architecture based on what they think the business wants or how they think the business works. You actually get a collaborative approach here to shaping your architecture. You wouldn't go straight from event storming to designing it and building it. You probably need to get in more technical details afterwards, but it's a good starting point that can set you on the right direction. And the fifth tool is you're going to need some kind of tool for making those choices about how much to modernize. So what I propose here is what I call the modernization strategy selector. It's not something I necessarily use strictly, but I use it to shape my thoughts. And basically, when we're modernizing parts of our system, I think there are two different perspectives. So one is a technology perspective. How much of the programming language, the infrastructure, the libraries, the frameworks do we want to modernize? And the second part is more on the business side. How much of the domain do we modernize? How much of the domain model in our software needs to change? And then if you look on the grid, you can see some combinations. So in the top right-hand corner, we might have total modernization, where we modernize all the tech. We completely redesign the business process. Maybe we go AI crazy, like let's throw away the old process. Let's build some new super duper AI automated process, completely rebuild the whole thing from a blank canvas. I think AWS call that reinvent. On the bottom left, you've got things like legacy encapsulate. And legacy encapsulate is basically, we have this old legacy system or part of the legacy system, and we don't want to throw it away. We don't want to rewrite it, but we need to get some data out of that. So maybe we build an API and put it on top of the legacy to get data out, or we can go into the legacy system and publish some events which the new modernized services can use. And obviously there's a lot of stuff in between those two different perspectives, like extract and remodel, which is where you're basically breaking a part of your legacy system out and you're remodeling the domain model, but you're not necessarily redesigning the whole business process around it. So yeah, I wouldn't use this tool as like a checkbox where you have to choose one of these, but thinking about for each part of your system, how much tech and how much of the actual software design do we change is very important, I think, to getting that optimization correct. So I've got a few minutes left to quickly talk about the final topic, which is more around the organizational aspect. So a do and a don't. So don't do event storming and wardly mapping for your whole company before you start modernizing. That's going to be a lot of effort. It might take you 6 months or a year to do that. So you need to be sensible. What I do recommend is a very ambitious, very aggressive, try to modernize something within the first 3 to 6 months. The longer you wait to start modernizing, the more people have doubts, and the longer you leave it, the longer until you start getting feedback. So I think it's good to be trying to find the right balance there about discovery up front and modernizing early. One of the techniques me and my colleague Eduardo recommend is these Kickstarter workshops, where you maybe do your listening tour and then you bring people together for 3 to 5 days in person, and you try to define this first piece of modernization that you're going to deliver. So as you can see in these workshops, we do some business and domain perspective. We then do event storming. We design the architecture. We think how the teams will work. And we try to build that first roadmap for the first 3 to 6 months, or at least put the foundations in place. And so that when the workshop is done, we're ready to start modernizing. Here's a real example of what this looks like in practice. Here we had 60 people. If you look on the wall in the background, you can see some yellow strips across the top. I think we identified, like 15 subdomains here. There was a manual process that involved spreadsheets and 80 manual steps. Like all these good things happen in these workshops. You can identify all those assumptions and problems and features that aren't being used in these kind of workshops. And so the workshops can be important, but if modernization is going to be happening for 2 years, 3 years, some companies even 5 years or more in some companies, you're going to have to think about how the organization works together. What structures do you put in place to make sure that modernization is progressing effectively and issues that come up are being dealt with? What Eduardo and I recommend, a pattern that we've seen a lot, is to create an architecture modernization enabling team. This is a group of people that don't do all the modernization work. They help others do the modernization work. And their most important job is to upskill the company, upskill the team so that teams can work independently themselves. And so over time, the need for this team should go down. So it's really a coaching team. This team is set up to identify what do teams need, what problems do they have, what's stopping them modernizing. Let's help the teams to achieve that. Let's do some coaching. Let's organize some workshops and trainings. And yeah, let's make the teams empowered to modernize themselves. We've wrote some articles about this if you want to read more about that. So just to finish up, as companies become successful, their legacy becomes a liability, and they become slow, and they become at risk from smaller, newer companies. So modernization is about being a successful company, but still being able to innovate like a younger company. Modernization is more than just tools and tech. It's thinking about that full stack of the UX, the domain model, but not over modernizing and doing too much. Always looking for that sweet spot. And I share these 5 different tools, which I think are all very useful for different aspects of modernizing. Listening tours, impact mapping, wardly mapping, event storming, and modernization strategy selector. And final word, don't get lost in the big upfront planning. Try and deliver something in 3 to 6 months and think about how you will change your organization to support modernization. Maybe you have an architecture modernization enabling team. Maybe you have a modernization community of practice. Maybe you use your principal engineers or your staff engineers, etc. But just think about how the problems that are produced during modernization will be addressed, especially the skills and capabilities that teams won't have if they've not done modernization before. And that is everything. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that very insightful talk. And we have quite a number of questions regarding architecture modernization. So we have a 20-plus-year-old complex legacy system with frequent production issues and slow feature delivery. What's the first step to modernizing it?
Oh, that's a very nice question. Probably similar to my experience in the UK government. Actually, old systems, difficult to touch, unreliable, causing bugs in production. That can take up a lot of developer time. You want to build new features, but you've got to address all these production issues. I think when we're talking about something that's 20 years old, the question of do we try to incrementally modernize or do we rewrite the whole thing? I think both of those strategies are very risky with an old system. If you try to rewrite the whole thing, you might have to wait 2 or 3 years until it's done, and then you realize it doesn't quite work like the old one. And you might have people who say, oh, the new one doesn't do this and the new one doesn't do that, so I'm going to keep using the old one. So doing a big rewrite can be risky. But since the current system has a lot of issues and it's 20 years old, trying to incrementally break pieces out of that can also be very difficult. So I think, thinking about the strategy, thinking about what needs to be modernized, I think I would probably start with awardly mapping in that situation to try and identify what needs to be modernized. One thing I learned as a consultant doing this with a lot of different companies is everybody wants to modernize everything. But when you put things on a awardly map, like you might have a workshop in day 1, we do event storming, day 2, we do some architecture design where they redesign the whole legacy system. And then day 3, we might do some awardly mapping. And people will say, and like what I like to do is actually replay it. So I tell people, I'm your CEO. You can do this in your company. Like you can say to your developers and architects, okay, I'm your CEO. Use your awardly map to convince me what you're going to modernize and in what order and how much you invest in things. And when people see there are a lot of things in commodity, they're like, yeah, we would love to modernize this. We know it's old and legacy, but maybe it's not worth it. And so I think that's a good way to try and clarify where are those high impact pieces. I would say in a situation like yours with a 20-year-old legacy system, the Wardley map might not show certain details which are key here, like the ongoing support costs. So I guess in a situation like that, maybe starting with something that can reduce production issues could be useful. Because one thing I know a lot from current and previous experiences, it's very hard to focus on modernizing when you have so many production issues. It takes a lot of your time. You're always working on a feature and you know in your head, like something could be broken in production. You're always checking the alerts and the logs. Even if you don't want to, it's always on your mind. So maybe in a situation like that, trying to identify the biggest causes of production issues and stabilizing those, that could be a good starting strategy.
Great, thanks for that. Is it possible to modernize in parallel to rolling out features? Slow down a bit, but never stopping delivery.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. That's the most common strategy for most companies. You have to try and balance modernization and feature delivery. Obviously, the perfect scenario is where you get to build a new feature and you can modernize that part of the system at the same time. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way because, to build a new feature and to modernize one part of the system, it might be coupled to lots of other things that you don't really want to touch. And sometimes if you try to modernize and build a new feature at the same time, you might only do half a modernization. You might say, well, we build something new outside the legacy for the new feature, but we still use the old legacy system for the data. So you have like events and APIs for the two systems to talk to each other. and you might never come back and finish that. And that could mean it's actually more complex when you're trying to keep data synchronized in different data stores. That's always making life a lot more difficult, can cause more production issues, raise conditions, eventual consistency, all those things. So I would say if you can build features and modernize at the same time, it makes sense. But I wouldn't rely on that strategy. I will try and be very clear that we need to make, so especially at the start of a journey, we need to commit to fixing some of the fundamental issues first. And it might be that in those phases we do less features, but once we have the framework in place to modernize, for example, once we have a way for the new stuff and the old legacy to talk to each other via events or APIs, once we have a technical platform that we build new services on, once we have those fundamentals in place, I think it becomes a bit easier to modernize and build new features in parallel. But I think in my experience, if you try to do features and modernize, features nearly always win. Features always turn out to be more complex and take longer than you thought. And it's usually modernization that gets pushed back and you do less of it. So I would say in that situation, yes, you can definitely do it in parallel, but I would always try and be more biased towards modernizing, and you'll probably still end up doing a lot more feature than you thought anyway, because modernization will get pushed to one side.
Great, thanks for that. Now we have some questions about, let's see, rewrite versus refactor. What are the heuristics for deciding on whether to write something from scratch versus trying to incrementally evolve the encountered legacy system that doesn't fit? And also, how many chances do you have to rewrite something better with the same people that made the mess in the first place? So both are about refactor and rewrite.
Yeah, I think firstly, I would say time is an important one. How long would it take you to rewrite something? I find that if something takes more than a year, that starts to get very risky. If you can rewrite something in 3 months or 6 months, I think that would be okay. I think that kind of time scale is less risky. Not, I wouldn't say I would definitely do that, but if it's something that can be done in 6 months easily, but when it gets to 1 year, I've seen a lot of these projects where things start out as a rewrite, and then 1 year later, the new version doesn't have all the old features the old one has, and so people don't want to use it. You're trying to keep data synchronized across these two systems. So I think for a full rewrite, yeah, if one part of the system is going to take more than a year, if a key part or a key piece of the modernization will take more than a year, and you're not going to have it in production, then I would say that's too long. And then the other side of things is how complex is the current legacy. If we have to go into legacy system and we want to publish domain events or put APIs on it so we can get data out, how much effort will that be? That could easily take up a lot of time. It could cause more issues in production. And I think the question then is, what's the appetite in your company to actually start modifying the legacy? Because if you're touching the legacy and you're going to have more production issues, we try to avoid production issues, but in the short term, when we're modernizing and we are touching the legacy, we do go through a period where there can be more problems and more issues. So is your company ready for that, to be able to understand why these issues happening? And do you have the processes in place where you can prevent those issues as much as possible and deal with those incidents effectively when they do happen? Those are some of the key heuristics, I would say. How long will it take? How long will it take? How risky is the current legacy? How likely are you to get issues? And is your company able to support those issues that happen running two things in parallel?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some feedback from the users, I would say, on that one. Like, how much confidence do they have in the new one that it will support all their use cases? Like, if they're saying, yeah, what you're proposing works, it covers all of our use cases, that would be one thing. But I had some situations where we said to people, for example, like support workers, okay, we're going to replace the old system with a new one and it will fix all your problems. And they said, no, don't do that, because people said that last time and now we have two systems. If you do this, we're going to have three systems to have to work in. So yeah, I think the user perspective in terms of the features that the new will provide also a good thing to dig into.
Great points. And last question for today. Do you have any recommendations or insights on how to effectively approach architecture modernization in highly bureaucratic organizations or highly regulated industries?
UK government was highly, you could say, bureaucratic. You know, the way governments work, there's a lot of processes that have to be in place that maybe other companies don't necessarily have. I think what worked well in the UK government was, I think, two aspects: principles and platforms. The UK government built a really amazing platform where you could spin up a new API or a new front end application, following a golden path, a paved road, and that was all taken care of by the platform, so that teams could focus more on the domain. And the platform baked in things like metrics, monitoring, observability, load testing patterns. There were some common libraries for HTTP calls. So if you can build good platforms that bake in a lot of your good practices, that can be very comforting to like compliance people, because they know, the developers can't make this mistake. It's baked into the platform. You have an audit trail. So I think, yeah, platforms can be very useful there.
Great. So thanks a lot for your session. We learned a lot today. And here is also our thanks again. Here's our upcoming session, orchestration versus choreography. So for the audience, feel free to join this next link. Looking forward to seeing you there. And this is an overview of our European slides, followed by the USA sessions as well. Thanks a lot to our conference sponsors, and you can check out the learning resources if you want to learn more. And also join us on Meetup and follow us on social media. So thanks again, Nick, and everyone else. So see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good one. Best of luck.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.